And I do have the chat box open so I can answer questions as they come up. There is a delay of about 60 seconds between me talking and what you see, so that keep that in mind. And I'll also go over all questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll have a Q&A session. So first of all, I would like to start with an acknowledgement that 2020 has been a really difficult year for a lot of us. Students had their classes go abruptly online. Many of us were no longer able to go to the lab and do our research, and all of us have been experiencing the effects of social isolation from the pandemic. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm really proud of you for not only making it through these troubled times so far, but also for showing up today ready to face another challenge, which is applying for the NSF-GRFP, which is no easy feat. I hope through the presentation I made for you today that I can make it a little bit easier for you by teaching you more about it. So who am I? My name is Kelsey Wood, and I recently received my PhD in genetics from UC Davis. And today I'm going to talk to you about everything you need to know to apply for the NSF GRFP, and hopefully to convince you to apply if you're on the fence about it. A little background about myself. I won the GRFP in 2014, and my application was helped a lot by a workshop on the fellowship that I attended at UC Davis. So I was inspired at that point to take over that workshop the next year, and I basically taught a version of the workshop you're going to be seeing today for the last 6 years. And my aim is really to give you all the specifics on the GRFP and share my advice on preparing a competitive application. And let me know if you guys can hear me okay. If someone wants to say something in the chat box. Okay. So there's several reasons to apply for fellowships. The main one is that you might just win them. Winning the GRFP is highly beneficial to your wallet in that it provides a stipend of $34,000 per year, which is much higher than what most institutions offer. Combined with the institutional allowance of $12,000 per year, winning the GRFP is basically winning $150,000 towards. If you win the fellowship, you also have access to additional funding opportunities for international collaborations through the GROW program and internships through the GRIP program. Winning fellowships, in addition to money, winning fellowships also gives you the freedom to research what you want in grad school. Theoretically, since you're self-funded, then your PI can't tell you what to do. And you also don't have to rely on TA-ships, which really frees a lot of your time to focus on research. Finally, fame. Winning fellowships is obviously really good for your CV. This fellowship in particular is really well known and prestigious, and having it on your CV will not only help you get jobs once you graduate, but winning fellowships and awards in general can lead to winning more fellowships and awards and a positive feedback loop. I personally believe that me winning the GRFP helped me to win a USDA pre-doctoral fellowship that I received in 2017, for example. Lastly, even if you don't win the fellowship, it's really good practice to apply. Writing grants and selling yourself in your research is now part of your job as an academic, so it's good to gain these skills now. All right, so who wins the GRFP fellowship? The NSF aims to give the award to grad students with high potential to become leaders in their field. There are unfortunately only 2,000 awards given, and with around 13,000 applications, it's definitely one of the more competitive fellowships, with around a 15% acceptance rate. Here I show you the number of fellowships given to UC Davis students over the last 6 years. It was usually around 15 to 20 students per year, and it went down in 2019, I believe, due to the NSF changing the rules as to the number of times you could apply during grad school. It used to be you could apply both first and second year, and now you have to choose between your first and second year. And also here I have a pie chart of the awardees by field of study, and it's just important to note that the NSF actually bases the number of awards per field on the number of applications per field. Who is eligible for the NSF GRFP? You'll want to check the solicitation for the absolute rules on eligibility, and you can also call the NSF if you have questions on whether or not you're eligible. But in general, it's open to U.S. citizens, national and permanent residents, unfortunately not available to international students. And you must be pursuing a research-based master's or a PhD in an eligible STEM field. Most STEM fields are eligible except biomedical related research or agricultural research It is allowed, but the research must be focused on basic science. Or in the case of biomedical engineering, it must be focused on the advancement of engineering principles rather than on applications. Social sciences are allowed and actively encouraged by the NSF, and you can't be getting a dual degree. There are 4 different academic levels that the NSF will evaluate applicants on. You'll be compared to people within the same level as you. So the first one would be undergraduate seniors or people who are applying to grad school this fall. So you had no grad study thus far. The second one is first year grad students. Third is second year grad students with less than 12 months of graduate study by August. And the fourth level is somebody who's had greater than 12 months of graduate study, not currently enrolled in a graduate program, with an interruption of graduate study of more than 2 years. And so the fourth level is the only case in which you can have a master's degree already and be eligible for the GRFP. If you have a master's and you haven't had a gap of over 2 years, then you're not eligible. Okay, when should you apply? So if you are an undergraduate or a pre-first year, you should apply if you're definitely applying to grad school this year. You can use your personal statement in your graduate school applications, and winning the GRFP will really help you get into grad school and join whatever lab you want. So it's really worth it to apply. And what you'll want to do is you'll basically pick one institution to write for your research statement, like as if you were going to that school. And then if you're a current grad student, you need to decide between whether you want to apply your first year or second year. You can apply as an undergraduate and then again as a grad student. So if you're already a grad student, then you need to choose. I think that it can be really beneficial to apply first year if you already have publications from your undergrad or predoctoral research. If you've joined a lab already, or you're rotating but you know in your heart what lab you want to join, then it can be useful to write as a first year. And also if receiving the fellowship would influence which lab you would join. For example, if they're the lab that you really want to join, but they don't have enough funding for you, you could apply to the NSF and then you might be able to join that lab. And the most important factor, I think, when deciding to apply to the first year is that you have something really solid to write about for your research proposal. So you can base it on your undergrad research or the research you want to do in grad school. And I'll go more into detail on research topics soon. And then you can choose to wait until second year if you're currently a first year, if you will have publications by your second year, or if you just don't have any idea of what lab you're going to join or what you're going to be working on. And then if you think you'll have preliminary results by next year, which is actually expected for a lot of second years. So in the end, it's really up, I think it's up to your unique individual situation on whether you should apply first year or second year. And I'm happy to help people if they want to send me emails on their situation. I can give you my advice. All right, but should I apply? I get this question a lot. People are wondering whether it's even worth it for them to put in an application because they may have some concerns about a poor undergraduate GPA. And I think that shouldn't stop you from applying. You can usually explain this in your personal statement, or you can compensate for it. Or you might have a lack of research experience. Again, shouldn't stop you from applying. It's something you can explain in your personal statement. Perhaps you switched fields or you went to an institution that didn't have a lot of opportunities. Or you can decide to wait to your second year when you will have at least 1 year of research experience. Lack of broader impacts is a legitimate concern because broader impacts is a really important part of this fellowship. And what I recommend people do is they use non-science examples if they don't have a lot of science broader impacts, and then have a lot of planned broader impacts to make up for a lack of past ones. People can be are worried that they're too busy to work on this fellowship because it definitely takes some time to work. And I say that if you're attending this webinar now, then you're definitely in a really good place to start early, use deadlines, and you'll have plenty of time to write a fellowship. And yeah, if you don't get the fellowship when you're a pre-grad, you can apply again your first or second year. Anyway, the bottom line is, even if you don't win, the experience of applying is highly valuable, and you win 0% of fellowships that you don't apply for. So I think it's worth it. You have a pretty good shot. Okay, a little bit more on how much grades matter. So you definitely don't need a 4.0 to win the GRFP, and it really is going to depend on what reviewer you get. Um, a lot of reviewers seem to say that major GPA is more important than overall GPA. And like I said, you can provide an explanation in your personal statement if you need to make up for grades. And you can even spin it to demonstrate resilience if your grades improved after a hardship. And I have some actual evaluations from NSF reviewers on some actual GPAs. And for example, one reviewer called a 3.8 in science and a 3.4 overall an outstanding GPA, whereas another reviewer called 3.68 a good academic record, and another reviewer called that same GPA not very competitive. One reviewer called 3.46 kind of low and 3.3 an average GPA. So you can see they're kind of really all over the board. However, GPA is only one minor a part of the application. If you write a stellar proposal and you have excellent broader impacts and glowing letters of recommendation, those are way more important than a GPA. And yeah, if you are writing as a pre-graduate student, you can take that funding anywhere. The funding goes to you and not the application. So you can write in your research proposal as if you're going to like UC Davis, for example, and then if you get the fellowship, you can go wherever you want. Yeah, I don't worry about the personal statement compensation. I've seen that people compensate for it really well and pretty compellingly. And in general, the NSF is supposed to be supporting people from like underrepresented communities in science and like from people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So excluding people because of their GPA is really not something the NSF like should be getting away with, I think. I also have a tweet here that encourages you to not let imposter syndrome keep you from applying. This person is an NSF GRFP fellow with an impressively low GPA and had zero undergraduate research experience, but still got the fellowship. So don't let that hold you back. All right. What about the new priority areas? So if you've read the 2021 solicitation or if you've just been on Twitter, you may have noticed that NSF added a paragraph this year saying that they are going to specifically focus on artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and computationally intensive research. And it goes on to say that applications they're still going to fund applications in all areas, but these are their new priority areas. And my take on these is I think it's just a political ploy by the NSF to not have the GRFP program budget cut. Um, I don't know if you remember this, but when Trump was first elected, he basically went around and cut budgets to almost all the scientific agencies, and the NSF somehow was spared miraculously. And I think that this was kind of an effort to make the NSF GRP program seem more important. When you look, there was actually an article in Nature. I have the link here, and a spokesperson from the NSF said exactly that these changes are not intended to exclude any areas of science supported by the NSF, and says that the NSF is simply signifying that these areas are of national importance and we are encouraging students to apply. The spokesperson said that the area's emphasis would not change the review or selection process. So, long story short, I think that you shouldn't worry about these new priority areas. If your research happens to be in one of the priority areas, that's great. Or if you can like easily incorporate it into your research, then you should. But otherwise, don't worry about them. So I have a quick question about agricultural research. Yeah, you can put it as a broader impact. You just the specific research aims should not be aiming to increase crop production, for example. Okay, now on to the actual application. The application consists of these 4 or 5 parts. Basically, you have the personal relevant background and future goals statement, which is 3 pages, and I'm calling that the personal statement. You have a graduate research statement, which is 2 pages, undergraduate and graduate transcripts, and 3 letters of reference. And then there's a bunch of fast lane extras you also need to fill out, and I recommend that people do this early because if you wait until the last day, you might risk running out of time to fill them all out. Basically, it's just you have to upload parts of your CV. They don't give you an option to upload the whole thing, but it's all your fellowships, scholarships, experiences, academic honors, and publications and presentations. And actually, this is a really way to procrastinate writing your GRFPs, to work on all these fast lane extras. And they're going to evaluate your whole application on the 2 NSF criteria, which are intellectual merit and broader impacts. So intellectual merit is your potential to advance knowledge. And they will evaluate this based on your academic performance, so your grades, your courses, any awards you got. They're going to evaluate this based on your academic or your graduate research proposal, how scientifically sound it is and well written and well thought out. They will also base this on your research and professional experience and based on the recommendations of your reference letters. Broader impacts is your potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So this basically consists, they're going to be able to evaluate this based on your outreach experience, the potential benefits to society of your research, your personal background in terms of diversity, and also your reference letters. And this is an important note that I feel like most people miss because they don't read the whole solicitation, but the NSF actually requires a separate section with its own header for intellectual merit and broader impacts in both the personal statement and the research statement. So that's a chance for you to summarize your intellectual merit and broader impacts in those statements. The personal statement. This is your chance to introduce yourself as a scientist and as a person. And I recommend a lot of people, there's some really great examples there on the internet of people's personal statements and their research statements. And I really recommend that people read as many of these as possible for ideas. But you really want to kind of be unique and memorable without being too cliche. So there's some really great examples of there where people tell a story about how they got into science or about why they're so passionate about science. But you want to be careful to not fall into the trap of using the same story as everybody else. So a really common one is when I was a kid, there was this cool science thing and it made me realize that science was cool or something, cliche like that. Or another one is like I had a relative who got cancer or another disease and that made me want to cure it. And so I became a scientist. Even if those are true, like they come off as pretty cliche. So I would recommend coming up with a more unique story for you. And then after your intro, your little intro story, you'll want to write about your relevant background. So you basically just take your CV and turn it into paragraph format. So for each experience, you describe the experience, what you learned from it, who mentored you, whether there were any publications or presentations, and etc. And you want to do this for your outreach experience as well. And you want to demonstrate that you have the experience to be successful in grad school. Yeah, you could include newspaper articles in your application. That would be an example of a broader impact, and that would be really good to include. And finally, the personal statement ends with a future goals statement. And here I recommend that people include and describe why they want to be a professor in academia. And even if this is not exactly what you want to do, I think it's a good idea to write about it because the NSF is trying to fund leaders in basic research. And they're not actually going to hold you to it. So I just recommend people like go that route and describe why they want to be a professor. If your career goal is to work in government in a governmental agency, you could also write about that. The NSF does want to support future leaders in government, but they seem to not support industry as much. Yeah, you should be able to include links to your articles in your personal statement. I've seen people do that. All right, letters of recommendation. So the NSF recommends at least three letters of recommendation. Applications with only 2 will be read, but are not likely to be as strong. I suggest that you can ask up to 5 people to write you letters. 3 will be read and 2 will be backup. And I really recommend asking for at least 4 because I've seen it happen too many times that their letter writers don't turn in their letters on time, and then they'll either have a weaker application, or if there are too few letters, they won't be read at all. This happened to somebody I knew my year in grad school, and it was really sad. And one thing you can do to prevent this from happening is to email your letter writers often and actually give them a heads up now. Let them know that you're going to be applying for the GRFP and ask if they'd be willing to write you a letter. Who should you ask? So if you are a current grad student, you should ask your current graduate advisor, and you must have this person as a second year. And they should also comment on the originality of your proposal. You'll want to have at least one former research supervisor as a letter writer who can talk about your research skills. And then you'll also want somebody who can speak to your broader impacts. This could be the same person, or it could be somebody who, for example, supervised you at an outreach activity. Um, Other letter writers can be professors that really adored you. And if you have low grades to explain, you should really try to have one of your letter writers vouch for your academic abilities. And so when you email your letter writers, you'll want to send them the instructions for letter writers, which is on the NSF's website, and then ask them what you'd like them to emphasize. Most likely they're going to be familiar with the NSF-GRFP, but if they're not, you might want to explain the unique things about this award. For example, the fact that they really care about broader impacts. And then once they're ready, you should also send your letter writers a copy of your personal and research statements and your CV. And make sure your letter writers submit their letters on time. Can't emphasize that enough. Research statement. First of all, keep in mind that you don't actually have to do your proposed research. So NSF is funding the person, not the research, but you still have to write a proposed research statement like as if you're doing a grant proposal. If 5 people write letters, only 3 of them will be read, and you rank them for the NSF. So research statement that you don't actually have to do, but it can be nice to write about what you're planning on doing because you're going to be doing a lot of work on this. So second year, if you're a second year grad student, you're definitely going to want to write about your research. And ideally, you'll want to write about the research you've already been doing for a year with preliminary findings if available. I'm guessing they'll be a little bit more lenient this year because of the issues with the pandemic. But in general, it's really good to write about stuff you've already been working on as a second year. If you are changing projects, you can also write about the new project, but ideally with something you have some background on, and if you can, try to include some preliminary data. If you're a first year, you also want to write about your research, but you might not have any yet. So if you're rotating, I would write about the research you're planning to do during your first rotation or in the lab that you ultimately want to join. And ideally, you'll also pick something you have some background knowledge of, or you could pick something that builds off of your undergrad or predoctoral research. I've seen a lot of first years just basically decide to write on their undergrad research instead of their doctoral research, and they've gotten the fellowship. If you are an undergrad, then you can I highly recommend writing about your undergrad research if you have any, or you can try to make something up, which is challenging, but it's totally doable. And what can really help here is to have a PI who'd be willing to mentor you and talk to them early and often with ideas. And actually, this is a good advice no matter what stage you're at. You really want to focus your topic when you actually write about it. Don't be vague or talk about multiple topics. You really want like one overarching topic. You can have up to like 3 or 4 aims that are addressing that topic, but there should be like one thing that your research is really focused on. And hypothesis-driven research is best for the NSF. They really want to fund basic hypothesis-driven research. I have seen some projects that were more exploratory that have been funded. But again, they're funding the person, not the project anyways. So you can really write it about whatever. And if your project is more exploratory, maybe you can find a way to make it seem more hypothesis-driven for this application because they're definitely going to like that more. And then finally, it really must be basic research focused. So you need to emphasize the science over the applications. And I have an example on how to emphasize basic science here. I have a couple examples. At UC Davis, there are a number of labs that do biomedical research. There's one lab in particular who I've helped people write applications for that focus on diabetes research. And some of these students I've helped get the award in previous years. And the way we did this is basically the students did not write about how their research would help treat diabetes. Instead, they wrote about how their research would help elucidate mechanisms in cell signaling and cell biology. So it's just a change of the focus of what the research is about. Another example is plant pathology. And some applications were accidentally rejected. I think that was either last year or 2 years ago because they were in plant pathology, and it was some algorithm where if it had pathology that they like automatically rejected it. It was a big snafu. But basically, they clarified it this year by adding to the solicitation that you don't want to. Your focus should not be on how the research will prevent plant disease. It has to be on understanding plant microbe interactions or the basic science of plant pathology. The applications of your research can and should be mentioned in the broader impact section, however. And are broader impacts actually important? In the animated version of these slides, the yes is jumping everywhere because it's actually super important. It's It's about 50% of the application, in my opinion. It's going to depend a little bit on the reviewer how important the broader impacts are, but yeah, this is one of the unique features of the GRFP compared to other graduate fellowships, is that the GRFP really emphasizes these broader impacts. Okay, so you have to have them, and you need to start working on them if you don't have a lot already. There's a couple of different places where you can incorporate your broader impacts. So in your personal statement, you'll want to go through and highlight all of your past and current activities, even if they're non-science related, any international work, volunteer tutoring, etc., anywhere where you've benefited society or done any communication or outreach. And you want to describe your future plans in detail. I would say like at least a paragraph of that. And one thing that can help you is by joining like science clubs, science communication clubs, or other societies that are in your area of research, and sign up for outreach activities now. And then you'll also want to have broader impacts in your research statement, where you can talk about societal benefits, so benefits to the economy, the environment, climate change. If you do have a biomedical impact, you can write about that here, especially if understanding the disease would help disabled people. That's a broader impact for them. You can talk about how you're going to share results, how you're going to communicate it to the general public by doing blogging. I've seen NSF reviewers just be so impressed by blogging that it's really kind of funny because it's so easy just to start a blog. So I almost recommend that everyone just start one today about science and start writing some articles because they are really impressed by that. And presenting research. Also, if you're planning to train undergrads or do any outreach to underrepresented communities, you'll want to write about that in your research statement. And I actually recommend that if you really want to hit the ball of the park, that you propose a specific outreach activity that goes along with your research, like to explain your research to like the general public or to a K through 12 audience, or etc. I think that looks really impressive if you can do that. Somebody was wondering if they could ask a industry supervisor to write a recommendation letter. Yeah, definitely. If they supervise your research, that would be fine. I would probably try to have not all of your letter writers be from industry, but it's totally fine to have one or two. All right, back to broader impacts. So there are 4 broader impacts criteria, and you can look at the NSF's website or look at the solicitation for more examples. But basically, the 4 are integrating research and education. So that would include outreach, mentoring, and teaching. Advancing diversity in science, so gender, ethnicity, disability, and geographic. So this includes your diversity that you bring to the table, as well as the audience of any outreach activities that you've done. Enhancing scientific and technical understanding, so doing blogging, open access publishing, mainstream media. These are all great ways to get public communication. And benefiting society. And this can include influencing public policy or organizations, or just the overall impacts of your research on society. Okay, intellectual merit versus broader impacts. This is something that's kind of confusing because a lot of people will think that they have a broader impact, but it's actually technically an intellectual merit. For example, if there's a sentence like, I will study blank in order to learn more about this broader, more important topic, that's still intellectual merit because it's advancing knowledge rather than contributing to societal outcomes. So in order to make a broader impact, you have to change the phrasing and say, I will study blank to help disadvantaged population, increase agricultural productivity, protect the environment, etc. That's a broader impact. So just advancing knowledge is not a broader impact. So don't accidentally confuse the two in your application. Okay, and I have a couple examples of organizations you can join. These are kind of Davis specific, except for the online ones. There's the Association for Women in Science. If you're a woman, there's other similar organizations for different minority groups. There are numerous scientific societies. For example, in Davis, there's a Botanical Society. There's the Association for Plant Biologists. So joining a scientific society can be seen as a broader impact idea or a broader impact activity because you're contributing to a community. Science communication groups are really great. So UC Davis has one called Science Says, which is really fun. And they do a lot of online, and they used to do a lot of in-person outreach. We'll have to see the future of that. And there are also at least 2 online outreach opportunities that I know of. One's called sciencebuddies.org, which pairs you up with a K through 12 student doing some science experiments, and science.org, which is plant biology focused. And I've done that one in the past, and it was really fun. It was all online and mentoring. The planning science that I did was mentoring AP biology students. Yeah, so I think the online outreach activities are probably the best ones to do during the pandemic. If you do, I really recommend to start a blog and start writing about your science on the blog. And Twitter is also a really great place to discuss research and get a platform. I don't know, you can kind of like gain a following for your blog using Twitter. Also, if you can like get articles published in your school's newspaper or in other forums online. I know there are actually a lot of websites these days like Medium where you can just publish an article and start getting that out there. That's probably a good activity to do during this pandemic. Okay, so moving on from broader impacts, who are the NSF-GRFP reviewers? So there's a reviewer at UC Davis that I've talked to a lot, and he's really elucidated the reviewing process for me and others. And basically, he says that they're a pretty equal mix of academics, industry scientists, and government scientists. They're usually not actually going to be experts in your field unless you're lucky. So you do need to define your terms really well and do choose the right field of study because you want them to be the most likely to be able to understand your application as possible. And they're trained online for how to rank GRFP applications. And based on my experience reading reviews, they don't seem to be trained very consistently on how to rank them. There's a lot of reviewer bias. And one thing the NSF tries to do to make up for that bias is that they calculate a z-score for each reviewer. So the z-scores are compared across reviewers, basically, like so it ranks them. And yeah, each reviewer is given about 30 applications, and they're all very busy professors or scientists, and they're probably only going to read your application once. So it really needs to deliver on the first read. And then I have a couple examples of some reviews. I really highly recommend, going online and reading reviewer impact on other people's applications because it's really insightful to kind of get into the heads of reviewers. So this one is reviewer one. This one's actually from my NSF proposal. And I liked reviewer one because they gave me 2 excellent scores. Excellent for intellectual merit and for broader impact. So you're actually, in the reviews, you're evaluated on intellectual merit and broader impacts, and you're given a score for each of those, and then they're going to average them. So this is, again, to emphasize how important broader impacts are. It's basically half of your points. And what this reviewer liked about my application is they liked my in-depth research plan with clear indication of the scientific questions, specific aims, detailed and well-thought-out experimental designs. They noted my research experience, my publication records as benefits to my application. And then for broader impacts, they liked that I was actively involved in community outreach, mentoring disabled students, and that I was one of the active members of the Association for Women in Science, which I wouldn't say that was true. I was in the association, but I didn't really do anything. And yeah. But however, reviewer 2 was less enthusiastic about my proposal. So this is the same proposal. One reviewer gave it 2 excellent scores, and this reviewer gave me a very good for intellectual merit and a good for broader impacts. So they liked that my proposal was strongly written and highly logical, but they felt like my broader impact could have been more strongly presented / more convincing. And then for the broader impacts, they say the broader impacts as presented solely rely on the intellectual merit impacts that would be subsequent to and far removed from the actual project proposed. So I think I made the mistake here in my application of writing about intellectual merit in the broader impact section and not really emphasizing my broader impacts. Luckily, I still got the fellowship. So, but I just wanted to show those 2 examples on like how varied reviews can be and how reading reviews can give you warnings on what to look out for. Someone says in the broader impact section, is it better to focus on past or future broader impacts? I recommend that you write about your past broader impacts in your personal statement, and then also have a whole paragraph for future broader impacts in your personal statement, and then in your research statement that you also mention the future broader impacts, but you probably won't have enough room to really go into detail because the research statement's only 2 pages, including references, so there's not a lot of room to go into the broader impacts, but you need to have at least a small paragraph on them. All right, so that is actually that's my presentation on the GRFP. And then I've included this bonus presentation on procrastination. It's just a few slides. But I think it's really important because I think for a lot of grad students and undergraduates as well, that procrastination can be an invisible roadblock that can prohibit you from either applying at all or can make it so you wait till the last minute and you don't submit as strong of an application. And I think the one thing in order to fight procrastination, it really helps to understand what causes it. And it's not caused by laziness or lack of ambition. It's actually basically it's a psychological phenomenon and a behavioral conditioning one, where your brain is trying to decide between short-term immediate rewards and working towards your long-term goals, in which you have a really delayed reward. And most of the time, your brain is going to choose the immediate reward because you have all these appealing distractions. You have Facebook, television, etc. Hanging out with your friends. You get an immediate reward. The long-term consequence, though, is that you have delayed guilt and anxiety over not completing the task. And this can actually cause your brain to want to go to the immediate rewards even more, and you kind of cause this loop where you're stuck in the immediate rewards and just feeling worse and worse about not working towards your long-term goals. In addition to the fact that the long-term goals result in a delayed reward, you also have fear of failure, imposter syndrome, and task adversiveness that can prevent you from even getting started. And studies have shown that depression or anxiety can make these worse. So it's really time to work towards your long-term goals. And so you need techniques to deal with this. And actually, I think it's worth mentioning that I found that antidepressants, for me personally, helped me a lot with my procrastination because I was just really anxious about not working. Anyway, I have also a couple of non-medical techniques for dealing with procrastination. And the one that I recommend the most is this little tomato timer here, also called a Pomodoro timer. And it's really simple and it sounds almost stupid, but it's a magical technique where you just set a timer for 20. You work on something like straight for 25 minutes without any distractions. And then you get a 5-minute break where you can check Facebook or do whatever. And they're like apps, and each one of these sets of 25 minutes is called like a Pomodoro. There's like apps, they're called like tomato timer apps or other ones you can download. I don't know, it sounds really simple and silly, but it works like magic, and I highly recommend you try it if you have problems with procrastination. I think another reason that it helps is because it doesn't seem that daunting to only work on something for 25 minutes. And usually what happens is once you do one set of 25 minutes, you're going to want to do another one, and you'll end up getting a couple hours of work done. And so I use this technique to write my NSF, and I've used it in the rest of my grad school career. Another technique is just acceptance and mindfulness. So just accepting the fact that you're a procrastinator can actually help, because then you stop beating yourself up over it and stop giving yourself anxiety, which makes it worse. So just be mindful that you're going to procrastinate and be proactive at preventing it ahead of time by using these techniques, for example. A really successful technique for me is peer pressure. So I used it a lot during this pandemic. I had accountability buddies that I would message and let them know what I accomplished each day and what my goals were for the next day. And I think having peers that will hold you accountable or who are working on similar stuff as you can really help. So if you have other students at your school who are writing the GRFP, those would be perfect peers to hold you accountable and be accountability buddies with. You can also set writing rituals, like specific locations, to kind of help you get into the mood for writing. I used to go to coffee shops, but now I just have a desk in my house that I use. Positive procrastination is a clever trick. So this is a technique where you